think different. These are the two words Apple was founded on, and I'm a huge fan of the brand, as you could probably tell between the computers behind me, the watch, the phone. I use a lot of Apple products, and I personally think that buying Aptera would be one of the best things Apple could do as a company, for their brand, for their future, for their valuation. And we've noticed a lot of stagnation with the stock over the past couple of years, and I think a lot of investor skepticism when it comes to Apple as a growth company comes from the fact that they've grown to such an insane volume. When you've got over 1 billion active iPhone users every single month, how much more can a company possibly grow? And I definitely think at this day and age, there is a lot of pent-up investment hype behind any electric vehicle startup, even if they haven't delivered something yet. Big investment groups see large potential in the future of electric vehicles. They see rapid growth, they see lots of profitability, and they don't see that with Apple, because Apple hasn't announced their own electric vehicle. Tim Cook has occasionally talked about it and said that they're more interested in the in-car experience with things like CarPlay, but that's not very profitable, nor does it give you that electric vehicle startup investment energy that so many startup companies are able to get so much funding from. Apple hasn't, because they either want to play the in-car software game or they want to play the robo-taxi game, but my prediction is they're going to keep a sharp eye on Cruise and Waymo and find out that this robo-taxi business model, especially if you don't have access to Tesla's full self-driving software, is not even really that profitable either, and doesn't scale as easily as many brands were originally hoping because of how much pre-mapping and regulation and permits and stuff you have to get in order to launch a robotaxi service. So I still think the general public would be far more invested, far more interested in what Apple is doing as a company if they were genuinely working on a vehicle that people could buy, not something you could ride in, not some software package you can access in any old car. And Apple tends to not want to enter any market until they feel like they can do something different with it, until they can make it their own, make it unique, and make it separate from the rest of the world. They don't want to just come out with their own version of something that already exists with their logo. They tend to only enter spaces once they feel like they've got something special. At least that's the impression I got with Apple Watches, AirPods, and AirTags, all of which launched under Tim Cook. Smartwatches, wireless headphones, and geo-tracking devices, they all existed before Apple entered this field, but they found a way to mainstream it. They found a way to simplify it and make it understandable and digestible to the everyday person, and that's what I think Apple could do with Aptera. Now, I have many reasons for selecting them over other electric vehicle startups. You know, a lot of people have said, why doesn't Apple buy Lucid? Lucid is a much more traditional car. It's not a three-wheeler. It's not a two-seater. Why doesn't Apple buy, you know, Canoe or Fisker? And part of the main reason I actually vote for Aptera before all these others is I think that Aptera fits that brand vibe that Apple's always been looking for, to separate themselves, not just to blend in with the crowd, not just to be an everyday vehicle, but to do something different. And I think Aptera would be an efficient and cost-effective way for Apple to suddenly brag about breaking records in the EV space. Aptera is, of course, a startup that is funding dependent on getting production going, but just like how their vehicle has an extreme focus on efficiency, so does Aptera as a company with their resources and their financing. Thanks to investment from Sandy Munro, who has praised Apple for ditching the charge brick from their iPhone boxes, so I feel like Munro and Apple could probably get along pretty well. Aptera wouldn't need that much upfront investment to get production going. They already have lots of contracts with existing suppliers, and even if Apple decided to buy out Aptera entirely, like completely acquire the entire company, it would cost likely less than an eighth of what it would cost for Apple to buy Lucid, which Lucid is already having demand problems with their higher-end EVs, lots of people canceling their orders, and they also use, in my opinion, the inferior charge port, the CCS connector, which means they're reliant on the much worse and much less reliable Electrify America, whereas Aptera has already agreed to adopt the best charge connector, NACS, which will have access to the best charging network in the United States, the Tesla supercharging network. But I feel like Apple would want to stand out in the EV space. They wouldn't want to just blend in with the crowd and buy any old EV startup. The fact that Aptera would be able to brag over all other EV brands that we have the longest range EV, up to 1,000 miles on a charge, and we also have the most energy efficient EV on the market, really aligns with Apple's ethos. They brag about efficiency all the time. Apple loves talking about how power efficient their chips are, how they can take the smallest batteries in smartphones and still have industry leading battery life because their chips just sip power at an extremely relatively low amount. Even with their desktops though, when Apple unveiled the Mac Studio, they were bragging about how many kilowatt hours of energy are saved by their ARM architecture and by the silicon that's in their machine compared to how much performance per watt you would get out of a custom PC. So even though Apple's not in the electric vehicle space, they're happy to boast about how many thousands of kilowatt hours can be saved thanks to their chips. And it's that type of extreme emphasis on energy efficiency that I think would attract Apple to Aptera, because they could boast about how they have the most fuel efficient vehicle on the market, so efficient that the solar cells literally charge the vehicle for free. So for many people, they won't even need to plug in at night. They won't even need to charge their car in their garage. They don't even need a place to park it, because as long as you live in a place that's pretty sunny, which Apple is based in Cupertino, I think they like the California culture, that simplifies the EV ownership process. That streamlines it, and that's what Apple loves with their products, is making things simple, making them intuitive and easy to understand. And what's more easier to understand with an EV than the fact that you don't even really have to plug this in most of the time? Probably occasionally on road trips, but even when the Aptera goes on a road trip, it's going to have access to the far superior charging network that Lucid and Canoo don't have access to. And while we don't have a concrete number of the market cap on Aptera, some have said it's sub 1 billion, some have said that it's closer to 2 billion more recently. Apple's got plenty of cash on hand, and this would not be the craziest buyout of all time. You know, if you want Apple to buy Lucid, which clearly Peter Rawlinson does, especially after that Lucid in the Air event, they're very much trying to get bought out by Apple, I think. They're going for that Apple vibe, the high quality production value, the high value marketing. But in my view, that's the wrong call, because it's increasing the overhead, increasing the expenses of the company, and especially when we're in the economic climate we're in right now, I don't think Apple's gonna feel comfortable dropping $20 billion on any company, really. Even if Twitter was available for $20 billion, I don't think Apple would buy them. Whereas Aptera, I think Apple could easily buy them out entirely, and it wouldn't even cost as much as it cost them to buy out Beats, which they bought for $3 billion. That's pretty much the largest buyout Apple has ever done. They don't tend to buy up companies like Microsoft does or Elon does, where you get a bunch of shareholder money together and you draw out all these big loans so that you can make these massive buyouts. Apple tends to buy smaller startup companies and incorporate those startups into their software, into their ecosystem. And I feel like the Aptera is a great first step, because no, obviously the Aptera is not going to be everyone's primary vehicle, but the fact that a $1 trillion company like Apple would be investing in a brand that's specifically targeting affordable vehicles, in fact, one of the most affordable vehicles you could buy new, considering the low cost of ownership of the Aptera, I think Apple would get a large valuation increase. And of course, this would allude to the concept that Apple was going to have a very large hand in designing Aptera's next vehicle, which would be a 4-door, probably 4-wheeled sedan with a hyper focus on still being really efficient, but of course being a lot more practical than a 2-seater, 2-door vehicle like the Aptera. In my view, it's a great first step where they can affordably, for only a couple $2 billion, which Apple definitely has that cash on hand, they can afford to drop that kind of money, would instantly increase the valuation of the company, let people know that they're interested in entering the electric vehicle space and not just a luxury, high-class, like rich grade of electric vehicle, but one that is hyper-focused on sustainability, which Apple has always been boasting about how much they care about the environment, showcasing how they remove things from the packaging in order to make it more environmentally friendly to transport products and use more recycled materials in their designs and even their packaging. That, I think, would go hand in hand with the Aptera as a brand, and of course send a message to people that yes, we are going to build more electric vehicles and more practical ones in the future, but just with the extreme emphasis on efficiency. And Aptera, I'm sure, would be very happy to start production with that kind of big tech funding. Part of the reason I think Rivian has been able to ramp and diversify their product lineup so much is because they had big investments from big tech, and I would love to see some big tech investments get behind Aptera before they even IPO. Not to mention Aptera, I'm sure, would appreciate the silicon, the contract suppliers that Apple has in place for cameras, and the infotainment that powers the Aptera could be by Apple silicon. You could put a M1 or M2 chip inside the Aptera, easily run games from the App Store when parked, and of course you could have the enhanced CarPlay experience built into the Aptera. Apple could be working directly with the software teams there and make a really compelling offer where you have an Apple designed software experience, so Apple Music and iMessage and Siri, everything that people love about CarPlay on the big screen inside the Aptera. And of course, with the enhanced CarPlay experience, they could bake in ways to monitor your energy consumption, and that would also show your speed and have different alerts that show up up when you activate Safety Pilot, which we know Apple's been working on their own autonomous vehicle software for years, incorporating all of the machine learning and AI training that Apple has come up with into the Aptera would make the vehicle a lot more compelling, and I definitely think the pre-orders and reservations for Aptera would skyrocket if Apple entered the business, but I just think it's a mutually beneficial relationship. Apple is taking a lot of fire from Elon right now, and Elon's toying with the idea of making his own platform, making his own smartphone. What better way to have shots fired back at Elon than to enter the electric vehicle space, boosting the company's valuation and increasing the likelihood of people saying, oh, okay, Apple still has a lot of room to grow. They've conquered the smartphone space and they've conquered the headphone space and smartwatch space, but now they're entering the electric vehicle space, and they're starting off with somewhat of a niche vehicle, right? They're starting off with a three-wheeler, two-seater. That's not going to outsell Tesla, but it would be a cheap way to show that they're serious about the electric vehicle future and that they want to beat out everybody else when it comes to affordability and efficiency. And I think really the software that Apple has in store with cars would greatly enhance the experience of owning an Aptera, and supporting features like Apple Car Key and building in Apple's version of autopilot, as well as having a very streamlined, very power efficient processor powering the whole vehicle, would just be great for Aptera as a brand. It would be great for Apple, and it would be great for us, the Aptera enthusiasts, the Aptera fans out there, especially if you're in the iOS ecosystem. But I don't necessarily think the Aptera would be unusable or a bad product by any means for Android users, just like the way Apple has continued to make Beats very good wireless headphones for Android phones by putting USB-C in Beats headphones, and sometimes not even putting Apple's own custom silicon, because the Beats line was Apple's way of diversifying their headphone market and offering something for those non-iOS users. So in a similar way, maybe the Aptera can support Android Auto or still be very software friendly for non-iOS users. I know I'm imagining a lot, and this probably isn't going to happen, but in my view, there's no other electric vehicle startup out there that is at a low enough market cap but early enough in their development phase that Apple would consider buying them. And I just feel like the Aptera ethos and the Aptera vibe aligns so much with what Apple wants to do with their products, and have that mentality of think different approach to vehicles. I don't think Apple just wants to enter the EV space with a traditional sedan, a traditional crossover just with an Apple logo on it, and even trying to buy out a company like Lucid is going to be far more expensive. And again, they have demand issues and profitability issues, whereas Aptera, they haven't delivered vehicles yet, but they are using a fraction of the money to get their factories going. They don't need that massive of an investment to get production started, and I think profitably, because of how cost effective they've designed their vehicles. So please try to tell me why exactly I'm wrong. I personally am not a believer that the Aptera is an extremely dangerous vehicle either. I think there's some great videos by Aptera Owners Club you guys should check out about how safe of a vehicle it can actually be, and they're going to build in airbags and they're going to crash rate it at the same crash ratings of a full-on car, even though they don't need to. There's so many great things I think Apple could bring to Aptera, and also a lot of publicity and great things that Aptera could bring to Apple. And I love these two brands so much. I just want them to get together, and I think they would truly create something special with just a three-wheeled vehicle powered by Apple CarPlay and Apple Maps, and it supports Apple Music, and it charges itself, and it can access the supercharging network, and it can go further than any other EV on a charge. How cool is that, right? If you think I'm crazy or if you think I'm wrong, please let me know why in the comments below. And thank you to everyone on Patreon supporting this channel directly. Seriously, helps me out a ton, as does just watching these videos. So thanks again. Have an excellent rest of your day.